come and worship him. After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Now, this week I have been spending a lot of time thinking about this particular story. I'm going to see if this thing will hold up my Bible today. Normally it doesn't, but in fact, I'll preemptively lower it. So this is, if we've grown up in the church, this is a story that we're all very familiar with. The three wise men, although we don't actually know that there were three. It's kind of just, I think, part of church tradition that there's three because there were three gifts. But if you stop and think about this story for any period of time, it's rather quite obscure. There's these three wise men. They come from a foreign land following a star, or so they say. And they come to Herod, who is a tyrant. He's known for killing people, I think, in general. And it's like they're kind of, I don't know, they're kind of ignorant or innocent. They kind of show up and they're like, hey, Herod, like, we've heard there's a king. There's a king. We know that there's a king that was born. Like, where is he? And Herod's like, there's a king? I'm the king. Like, this is kind of a conflict of interest, if you will. But he doesn't really, it appears that he doesn't really let on that he's quite disturbed by this news. And what's also interesting is that I don't know if these wise men were from a different part of the world or what. Like, how did they not pick up on the fact that maybe this wouldn't be the best news to bring to Herod? Right? Like, anybody who's in the area kind of knows that Herod doesn't really like competition. And so that to me gives me a little tip, a little hint as to where these wise men came from. To me, it tells me that, well, they probably weren't from somewhere nearby. They probably came from a little distance. Now, it says they were following a star. How many of you would, if you saw a star tonight, would start planning a trip that could take you at least weeks, if not months, to complete? Like, this to me just is, I've pondered this. Like, what is it about this star that these wise men saw that caused them to absolutely stop their lives, pack up, plan a road trip, and head out to Jerusalem? They packed up these extravagant gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and they headed across the country, westward leading, the song says. And they went to Jerusalem. I have spent over the last week or so I've spent time looking up and studying a little bit, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen the film The Star of Bethlehem. How many of you have seen that film? It's from 2007. Rachel and Stefan. Have you seen it, Jason? The Star of Bethlehem? Okay, The Star of Bethlehem is more of a documentary. It's about this guy, he's a lawyer, and he gets it, he starts studying the Star of Bethlehem. So I use that for most of what I'm going to say today, comes kind of from him and some of my own research. So I'm going to see if this works. Okay, how many, can you kind of see that picture? It's a picture of an old guy, or at least he's not that old, but he looks like he lived a long time ago. Anybody want to venture a guess at who this guy might be? Nope. Rachel, do you have a guess?
Kepler.
Nope, you're wrong.
Is it Shakespeare?
Nope. Nope. Yeah, I know, everybody was going to guess this. This is Tycho Brahe. I don't know how to say that. Brahe. Hey, Brahe. That's where it originated from, right? Okay. He lived from 1546 to 1601. Does anybody know what's significant about this guy? I'm going to go ahead and say probably nobody. But does anybody want to venture a guess? He did study stars. Very good. Very, very good. He was, there was a young man who apprenticed under this guy, okay? Does anybody want to guess who apprenticed under him? Kepler. Johannes Kepler. This guy. Now, Tycho, he was a bit of a, he liked to study stars. Now, this was kind of in the era, I have a whole bunch more slides there, but they're not, no, you can turn the light back on. They're not quite refined enough to actually use, so I'll just leave them. So Tycho lived in a time in history when it was still prominent that the earth was the center of everything. The earth was the center of the solar system. And so he had some extensive data with respect to the movements of the stars. Now, most of the stars in the sky, I don't know, unless if you're spend a lot of time outside in the country, you probably don't really know a whole lot about what happens in the sky, but we do know that the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. And the sky, the starry sky does the same thing. It has to do with the earth is rotating, so things appear to rise in the east and they appear to set in the west. Now, if you take a time lapse of the sky, you'll note that there's the North Star, and the whole sky actually looks like it's rotating around the North Star. So if you take a time lapse, sometimes I've slept outside under the stars, and you'll watch the Big Dipper. It'll start in the east, and then you fall asleep, and then you wake up, and then it's a little further along in the sky, and then you fall asleep again, and you wake up, and it's a bit lower in the west. So everything rotates around the North Star, which is called Polaris. So these guys, Tycho and Kepler, they studied the stars and they had tracking. They knew where everything was, and they were trying to develop an understanding of what caused things to move in the sky, okay? So there are these stars that are known in history as wandering stars, okay? So most of the stars in the sky, they follow that same pattern every single night. From night to night, they always do the same thing. They go from the east and then they go down to the west. And they don't really move with respect to each other. There are, however, wandering stars. And today we know them as planets. So the planets, you can see them as well. And if you spend any time with me outside in the dark, you'll probably hear me say like, oh, look, I wonder if that's Jupiter, or, oh, that looks kind of like Mars. I like to point the planets out when I'm outside in the dark. You can see them, and they tend to be brighter and bigger. So most common ones to see would be Jupiter, Mars. Sometimes you can see Venus or Saturn. And these planets, they don't follow the same pattern through the sky. They still travel from east to west across the sky, but because they're orbiting around the sun, they sometimes do weird things. So over the course of days or weeks, you might see them transit a certain star, and then depending on how the orbits line up, sometimes they actually appear to it's called, why can't I think? They appear to go backwards in the sky sometimes. So they'll be advancing through the sky. They appear on, say, the left side of this star, and then all of a sudden they'll go back, and they'll appear to go back. So what Tycho was doing is he was trying to calculate he was trying to come up with a mathematical model as to how these stars were moving, these wandering stars. What made them move? How were they moving? What were they orbiting? What was going on? So he had collected all kinds of data on the movement of these wandering stars, the planets. And he was trying to compile a mathematical model. And he had the Earth in the center, and then he had the sun, and he had some of the planets orbiting the sun, but the sun was orbiting the Earth. He had some obscure model. So Kepler came and started apprenticing under him, but he was a little intimidated by Kepler, and so he only gave Kepler some of the data that he had. He gave him only part of the data. He had data, say, on Jupiter and on Mars and on all kinds of planets. He just gave Kepler data for Mars and said, see if you can figure out what's going on with Mars. Now, it turns out that Mars has one of the most obscure patterns in the sky. And so Kepler started studying Mars, and over the course of time, he figured out that actually Mars was orbiting orbiting the sun, and so the Earth was also orbiting the sun. And so he came up with the three laws of motion in the sky. And it was a huge breakthrough, scientific breakthrough in his day, early 1600s. It created all kinds of chaos because you're talking about a whole world that believes that the world is the center of the solar system, and now he's proposing that the sun actually is. So it created all kinds of stir. But once Kepler figured out the math behind it, what do you think the first thing he did was? He looked for the Star of Bethlehem. He was a Christian, and he's like, if I can calculate where these planets are, you can literally, with these math formulas, you can turn the sky back to any point in history. So Kepler, with his newfound formulas, he started rolling the sky back. And he knew that he had data on King Herod, and he knew that Jesus was born while King Herod was still alive. And it was commonly believed, and to this day, that King Herod died in 4 BC. So people always pin Jesus' birth kind of maybe 5 BC or 6 BC, somewhere right in there. So that is where Kepler started looking for the star. And he searched, and back then, obviously, all this calculation was done manually. He had to do all these, it's some pretty intense math, and he did it all manually, and he kind of came up with a whole lot of nothing. Okay? He came up with a whole lot of nothing. But he wrote 2 books on it, on his search for the Star of Bethlehem. So, fast forward, and I don't know the modern history very well, but it's still an ongoing thing. What was the Star of Bethlehem? Some people think it was a comet. So some of you here probably remember Halley's Comet. The problem with comets is that they tend to be omens of doom. Like, they tend to, when people see a comet, it comes out from nowhere, and it tends to, in history, historically, if you look at the cave paintings, everybody's fleeing from the comet. They're not running to the comet. So some people think maybe it was a comet, but doesn't really make sense. There's something called a supernova. It's when a star implodes really, and it becomes very bright for, it could be up to 6 months. It could be months or years. It becomes very bright in the sky. And there have been supernovas in the past. I don't remember the dates, but in history, even in more recent history, there have been supernovas, and they'll light up the sky as bright as the moon for weeks or even months, and then they fade and are gone. So some people think it was a supernova. The problem with that theory is that if it was a supernova, you'd think a guy like Herod would probably have picked up on it, right? You have a supernova, Herod, probably people in Jerusalem or Bethlehem, they would kind of know about this star. And they would be like, yeah, we have seen this star. What does it mean? But Herod, and it seems like most of the people in Jerusalem were kind of clueless. Wait, what? A star? Can you tell me a little more about it? So supernova doesn't quite fit the bill. Another theory is that it's these wandering stars and a conjunction. Sometimes, and if you if you track the news, sometimes you'll see, oh yeah, Jupiter and Mars are going to be coming really close together, and they're going to be really bright. I sometimes note these things, but it does happen from time to time. And so that is the hypothesis that that the Star of Bethlehem, that movie that I was talking about, that's the premise that he takes in his research, is that possibly there were some stars that came together and produced the Star of Bethlehem. And so this guy, I probably should know his name, but I don't. He's a lawyer. He started looking, and the date, you have to know when in history to look. And with computer models now, you can roll the sky back and you can look at exactly all the movements of everything, all the stars and stuff from the first, like, any time in history. So he needed a date. Where should I start looking? And he went to Josephus. Do you know the name Josephus? He's an early Jewish scholar or historian, let's say. He lived kind of right around the same time as Jesus. And Josephus is kind of one of the main, let's say, extra-biblical historians that we use to cross-reference the biblical story. And Josephus, he pins Herod's date, at least a lot of the manuscripts in circulation pin Herod's death in 4 BC. But this guy, he went to some of the libraries, and he found that actually some of the earliest manuscripts of Josephus pin Herod's date of death in 1 BC. And so he started looking for astronomical events in kind of 3 BC or 2 BC. And what he found was, he found that Jupiter did some pretty crazy things. Jupiter basically drew, it transitioned past Regulus. Now, Regulus is a star in the constellation Leo the Lion. So Leo the Lion, what does that speak of? Jesus, he's from the tribe of Judah, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So Regulus is the brightest star in the constellation of Leo. And Jupiter, which is known in history as the king planet, because it's the biggest one, it's the brightest one, transitions past Regulus, not once, not twice, but 3 times over the course of a few months in 3 BC. So if you're a wise man from the east and you see a king planet transiting past a king star 3 times inside a few months, I think that's enough to kind of start making you ask questions. And there's theories about who these wise men were. Coming from the east, I think the most prominent, the one that I would subscribe to, is that these guys may very well have been passed down and studied in the school that Daniel would have started as a main leader inside the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire. So it's thought that possibly Daniel established, because he was in a prominent position, he was in charge of the magicians and all of those types of people in Babylon in his time. And it's thought that possibly these 3 wise men studied in material passed down from Daniel's time. And so they very well could have been familiar with some of the Old Testament prophecies. Isaiah, not all of them, because they didn't know that Jesus was going to be born in Bethlehem, which is an Old Testament prophecy. So if they see Jupiter drawing a halo around Regulus, the king star, it causes them, I believe it could be cause for at least, it could cause them to plan a trip to go visit this king. Now, there was more that happened beyond just the 3 transits. So on June 17th of 2 BC, Venus, which is the mother planet, and Jupiter, the 2 brightest planets in the solar system, appeared to collide. So when these 2 planets come really close together, they look, to the naked eye, they look like one bright light. And that happened in 2 BC. So the speculation is that these 2 planets together is what made up the Star of Bethlehem. Now that's all fun, and for me it's kind of enjoyable to study. Not everybody is like me though. But it helps shed some light onto what might have been going on in the story that we read in the Bible. So we have these wise men from the east. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Verse 7, then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared, and then sent them to Bethlehem. Go search diligently and find the child. what there's something that, because whatever, I can stand up here and give you a nice historical history lesson about the star and try to present kind of some physics and how stars move in the sky. But what I want to communicate, what I was asking the Lord, what does this all mean? What's the point? What's the point? Why would you send a star? Why would you send wise men? And you can look at different things, like you've got these rich people. God speaks to the rich people through the stars, and he also speaks to the shepherds, the poorest of people, and Jesus is for all people. You could pull that lesson out, which is good, which I think is true. But I think what spoke to me most about this story is how detailed God is. He has created such an elaborate plan. And when you think about when did God create the stars and the motion and the clock of the sky, it was created at creation. And so he knew some 6,000 or whatever years prior exactly how this would all play out in the sky. And I am fascinated by the Lord's attention to detail. How he arranged and he sent, let's go with the hypothesis that in fact these wise men were from a school studying under Daniel. He sent Daniel ahead. He incorporated that all into his plan for when Jesus was to be born. The amount of detail, the amount of alignment, the way that the Lord detailed and planned this all out in advance, that to me it speaks volumes about who God is and what his character is like. And it makes me say things like, well, if God figured all that out beforehand, what does he think of me? How does he feel about me? How does he feel about each one of us? And the truth is, God cares about the very little details of our lives. And he has planned them all out. He knows who we are, and he loves us. And he cares. He cares about the little things. And he knows all the little details. He knows how to make a star stop over Bethlehem. It says here that the star stopped over the house where Jesus was. He knows how to do that. Particular day in time, he knows how to arrange all of these things. It's absolutely staggering to me, the kind of detail that the Lord put into writing this story. He cares about us. He loves us deeply. He sent Jesus because he wants to be with us. And I love also in this story, and I hope this is our response too. The wise men in verse 10 of chapter 2, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. It's my desire that this would be our heart's response when we encounter Jesus. That our hearts would rejoice exceedingly with great joy. Because Jesus has provided us a way to have relationship with the creator of this all. The creator of the whole universe. Because of what Jesus did on the cross, we have opportunity to know God. And it should stir up in our hearts this joy, this exceedingly great joy, this confidence. And I was thinking about it this morning. Sometimes Rachel gives me a hard time because I poke at her. She she tends to know all of the important people at IHOP or even beyond. And sometimes I just like to poke at her. Oh, you're flexing. You sat in a meeting with, you've got Stuart Greaves on speed dial in your phone, or, like these different things. And I kind of poke at her, and it's kind of fun, right? She knows whatever. She knows all these musicians that everybody like oohs and ahs over. Laura Hackett or whatever, all these different names. And I was thinking about it even in the context of our workplaces, right? It's like sometimes we say it in kind of tongue-in-cheek, like, oh, you're going to the manager's meeting, like you must be really important, or like, oh, David, he used to be the chief of an organization, like he's a real big deal. And there's something that kind of we like about being close to or associating with important people, right? Or like, oh, I met so-and-so, or... Well, I was thinking about that in light of this story and in light of who Jesus is. And the reality is that we have opportunity to personally know and to communicate and to talk with and dialogue with the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And there is no greater relationship or greater joy that we could operate in than to have communion with the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And that's what we see going on here in this story. We have these wise men who travel across the country, and they meet and are overjoyed with this encounter with the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. This king who loves the detail, who loves sometimes he's described as a poet. He's a poet. He loves to detail these different little aspects. So this is a story about Jesus' first coming. And we see here how there's a starry dance in 3 BC and 2 BC that seems to indicate what could be the Star of Bethlehem. And we know from the Bible that the stars are for signs for determining or to keep the times and the dates and to know the seasons. And we know that Jesus said that there would be signs in the heavens. And this too excites me, because I like to ask the question, Lord, if you spoke through the stars so clearly at your first coming, will you do it again? Will you speak through the stars? Will there be wise men from the east who know of your second coming? Is that something? I think that there might be some truth to that. Now, I don't know how extensive. You have to be a little careful with some of these things, but I would challenge us. Let's keep our eyes open, and I wonder if possibly we might start seeing some signs in the heavens regarding the Lord's return. And it might look something like it did from Jesus' first coming. Look at verse 6, chapter 2, verse 6. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. The Lord cares. He sees the little towns. He sees the small communities. And I want us to go away from this morning with this sense that Jesus, he loves each one of us and he cares about the details of our lives. The town of Bethlehem, by no means least among the rulers of Judah. Jesus has a plan. He has a purpose for each one of our lives. And I'm going to close now in prayer. And Lord, I just ask that you would speak to our hearts. Jesus, you're a God of detail. All of these little things, they matter to you. How the stars move in the sky, the little town of Bethlehem, the shepherds in the fields. Jesus, you see the details, and when we look out at the world around us, all of that is under your watchful eye. You see what's done in secret. You see the cup of cold water. Lord, thank you. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for just your ingenious creativity. And thank you, God, for becoming a man. What a staggering reality. The Creator God who set the stars in motion became a man. Let's just take a few minutes right now and just meditate on who God is, His greatness, and His humility. Christmas is a good time of year to stop and pause and consider the humanity of Jesus. Just holding my little son, Jed, thinking, Jesus, you used to be like this. The God who set the stars in motion, held in the hands of his mother. Why? God, your love is strong. You care about the details of our lives. Thank you. Thank you, God, for making a way for us to draw near to you through your Son.